morning. we we really, we really like that song, don't we, John?
I do like it, but I took that down too. So I mean, well,
David Mason donated the song to the studio and wanted to help us out here at allpointstv.com. And when we start playing that song, we just simply want to play it over and over again. Thanks again, Dave, over there. You said Dave was in Pennsylvania, right?
yeah, Gettysburg area.
Okay. And thank you again, Dave. We show our appreciation every week because once we stop the music, we start playing it again. And so we're very happy that you're with us. And all of those out there in the listening audience, we are very happy to have you at allpointstv.com. I'm George Moss, the host of the program here called What's Going On. We come on Mondays, every Monday, and we're here from 2 o'clock to 3. And we have a special treat today because the second and fourth Mondays of each month, we have Sturrid's Black History Corner that comes on at 3:30 sharp. They are the ones that come in the studio very early, and at 3:30 they're very meticulous about the time. And so at 3:30 sharp, sometimes we may start at 2:01, 2:02, somewhere around there. But when these two captains come in, they get here early and they insist that at 3:30 sharp, their program goes on. Rain. We don't have any holes in the roof here, so I can't say rain. Well, say shine. The sunshine today. And even if there's sleet and snow outside, they're going to be here and they're going to run their program for the next 30 minutes when they come out at 3:30. Around 30 minutes, they stay around for that time. And then after that is over, they will sit back and receive the applause. We're glad to have you with us. We are just elated by the fact that we are now going into, I think, our 8th year here at allpointstv.com. And we could not do this program, and we would not do this program without your support. So we want to thank you for staying with us for the last number of years, and we are here for the long run. We're not going anywhere. John is doing a great job as our major engineer, and we have the light technicians, the sound technicians, and they make sure that we put on our best face when we come before the audience. I do want you to know that when we come before the audience, we're not just sitting here in these chairs without having done our homework, and a lot of hours go into the production before we come before the cameras. Today I want to talk about 3 topics, and I hope I can get to each one of them. I want to talk about the election that took place yesterday in France, and I want to say a few things that may not have been said by anyone else, and I want to tie it into some of the things that are going on here to put it into much larger context. So I'll be talking about the election yesterday between Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron, which I thought was a very important election. And I don't agree with the way it's been presented today in the paper. For example, in the Washington Post, they had an article that said that the far right movement was put on stall by the election in France. They were talking about the fact that prior to this election, we had Donald Trump elected in November the 8th of 2016, and before that you had the Brexit in terms of what was led by Farage. What's the person's name over in England?
Nigel
Farage. And this momentum that we're saying had been built up by the fact that we had Brexit, and that was more of a pulling out of the EU, and it really was an anti-globalist movement in England. And they were saying, what they're trying to say is that this anti-globalist, which means anti-immigration, at least to the point where you have these persons just flooding into these Western countries and changing the character of those countries, they're saying that it's really anti-globalism. What really what it really is that it's kind of like a nationalist movement where people are the countries are talking about securing their own borders and maintaining their own national sovereignty. So today, the Washington Post had an article that was saying that the far right movement was stalled yesterday in France. And what I want to do in the first part of the program is talk about that election and tie it into some things that are happening right here, because some of it has to do with some of the things that are going on here in this country in terms of why there's so much venom against the administration of Donald Trump. There's a reason why there's so much venom coming out. Hillary Clinton getting back out of the woods, so to speak. And they're talking about leading the resistance. You're hearing a lot of talk about resistance. We're going to lead the resistance. And so the question should be asked, the resistance to do what? What is this resistance about? And I think we can tie in what the Washington Post was saying about the election yesterday and what we're saying here on our own shores, because a lot of it is congruent in terms of what this really is all about. It's not just about the elections in a single country, but there's a certain kind of undertone going on underneath the surface that we're not necessarily paying attention to because it's not really being broadcast. And not broadcasting is part of the plan of how you actually bring these things about, because the people are not aware of all of the underlying things that are taking place, and they can't really put forth a defense against it to keep it from occurring. And they're very clever in terms of how they do things covertly and in a clandestine way to make sure that they keep their intent covered up. So yesterday we had an election that was not as close as some said it was going to be. They thought that, as opposed were indicating, as of the last couple of days, they thought that Le Pen would get something like 40% of the vote, and but would be positioning the campaign, in her case, to 2022 when they have the next election, since the president served 6 years in France. And so they were saying that at least there's a positioning of the kind of ideal she represents, which has grown from 18%, which is the amount of support that was given to her father. She was supposedly going to get 40% of the vote. And they were saying that the momentum is building, and although she may not win, it would be that in the future, at some point, Le Pen will be president of France. And I don't know if France has as much time to be. I think there were some things happened yesterday that make it very difficult for France to I think this is going to be very difficult for France to recover, and really to make it even more of an international international scope. I think it's going to be very hard for Europe to recover, based upon having read Mark Stein's book, very important book called America Alone. And if you look at the front cover of the book, you'll see there's a globe, and they have flags all around the globe. And the flag are these Islamic flags, and in the middle of that is the American flag. And what he's saying here, and saying America Alone, he's saying that globally there is a global movement going on, so that the United States is really being surrounded. And given what's happening in Europe and other parts of the world, then he's writing about the trends, and he's saying here that in the future, America will be alone in terms of its standing up against losing what the West once had as what we call Western values. And I do recall when I was in school, we took a class called Western Civilization. That's not even taught anymore. And so there's a little bit of, there's a creeping away from the things the West stands for, and we're putting something else in its place. It is very insidious and very covert, but the methodical movement, you see it going on in terms of blurring all kinds of lines. And it's not just the national boundaries, but a lot of lines are being blurred. And it goes into all areas. Last night, for example, they had a awards program, and they were awarding, they gave one award to a person because they are not, I think the word they use, they're not binary, meaning that they don't use binary terms, he and she. So you know, we used to ask, when you have a child, you used to ask, did you a boy or a girl? Now that question, because we're blurring these lines and we're supposed to be erasing lines and barriers, then the binary lines of gender, you know, male and female, you're not supposed to use those terms because it creates a certain amount of division. And so you're birthing now into the world persons. You're not supposed to be identifying more particularly and more specifically who that person is, those persons are. And so there's a lot of things going on. It's very insidious, but there's I think we're getting used to not having, you know, boundaries. It's like it's hard to define what reality is because reality is constantly changing. And so they had this election yesterday, and I was watching just looking at the news coming out of France leading up to the election. And I was noticing in that the French government made it illegal to publish any of the emails from Emmanuel. I mean, you couldn't print the emails. Emmanuel Macron emails were made illegal for the press to print what was made available in the to the outlets to come out with some information that they had uncovered that was not being covered in the press, and they made it illegal for these third sources, like we had here with Hillary Clinton, made it illegal for anyone to print what was discovered on those email sites. Now, I want to talk about that for a minute because I want to say something about why you have these leaks. If you notice it, in this election here in the United States, and also in France, they were worried about leaks, and you keep hearing about leaks. So what are these leaks about? These leaks are about people that are inside of the network that have some information behind the power corridors who don't like what is going on, and they see some information that needs to be reported is not being reported because the press is involved in covering up, because the agenda is a global agenda and they're trying to maintain protection of those who are carrying forth that agenda. So the leaks are coming out of those who are behind the wall, so to speak, that have some information, but it's not getting into the mainstream media. So therefore, to get the information out, they're leaking information. And what makes information necessary to be leaked is that the press will not report on it. Now, you probably noticed last week in this country, James Coleman was testifying last week before the Congress, and he was saying, what was I supposed to do? If I had some information and I didn't report on it, then that would amount to a cover-up. I mean, let's suppose that Hillary Clinton would have become president, and then it comes out and he did not report it. Then look at how that would fall back on the FBI and upon him as the director of the FBI. And so he had that to worry about. And at the same time, if he does come out, then it makes an impression upon the voters in terms of that information, painting Hillary Clinton in a negative light, more negative than it already was. Because a lot of people were already on to what Hillary Clinton was doing when she was Secretary of State, which was selling influence inside the American government. And the Clinton Foundation was nothing other than a money laundering operation. I think it's pretty clear. And so he's up there saying on the one hand, he had this problem in terms of he doesn't report what he knows, and it comes out later on that he sat on it. That's a problem for the FBI. And if he reports it, then of course it has an impact upon a potential impact upon the election. Although I don't think it swayed any the outcome. I think the outcome was because Hillary Clinton didn't do some things in her campaign, and it was just like what Axelrod was saying on one of the talk shows when he said that James Coleman did not keep Hillary Clinton from going into Wisconsin to campaign. He didn't tell her not to go into Pennsylvania. It did not tell her to come into these states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan at the last minute, trying to rally her base when she had not come in and took the base for granted in the 3 states that she needed to win in the end to win the election, because that's where she lost it as far as electoral vote is concerned. And so I don't think it actually swayed the election, but I'm making a point here that it's very interesting that Hillary Clinton is raising the question of James Coleman coming out with the information before the election. It's the same thing that we're hearing about over in France, where they would not allow information to be placed before the voters because it's very insidious and very quietly being done. What they're doing, though, is that they're guiding the voters to a certain candidate to produce a certain outcome for a particular result. And Hillary Clinton was saying that, and she just won't stop. They will not accept this result. And she was saying that if it had not been for Coleman, because I was winning up until that point, up until October, and if that had not happened, I would have won the election. So they're saying if the information that was available had not been made to the American voter, then the outcome would have been different, because the voters would have been voting upon less information than more information, as if more is not better in terms of being informed. I think you would think in a democracy, the more information that voters have, the more informed they are, the better they're able to make a very qualitative decision. But they're saying that more information makes the voter act in ways in which the voter should not act, because the voter's not acting in the way in which certain candidates will win. I mean, that's what they're actually saying. They're saying that if the voters had not been given the information, all of which none of it has been contested as not being true, they're saying if the voters did not have the correct information, all information they were given, the outcome would have been different. So they're saying that what the press was doing, if that had prevailed, where they're just reporting on one side, not reporting on the other side, and keeping everything else covered up, then it would have influenced the election. But how is that supposed to work in a democracy where you have elections based upon denying the voters the information they need to process to make a determination of who they want to be president of the United States? That's quite an earful, and it's very troublesome when you have that kind of point of view being promoted in public. So it's being said so publicly, as if that is not egregious. That's a very dangerous proposition, that you want to keep the voters in the dark and have them go to the poll and vote without having as much information as they could be obtained to share with the voters, so they can go in there and make. And when you pull the curtain and you mark your ballot, you're doing it from the most informed place that you can do it, because you have all information that's available. And they're saying the information out there, by making it available, that was wrong because the outcome was different. And that's the claim they're making. And this is what happened over in France. They had some very damaging information on Emmanuel Macron. And the government came out and said that if anyone publishes this information, that would be considered a crime, and the person would suffer a jail term. Now that was just recently put in place, so that they had information they sat on, and then no one printed it, and he came through and got even more votes than what they thought that he would get. She didn't break the 40% mark. They thought she would get those votes. And some thought she was going to win the election, because the fact is that France was having some more problems with the jihadists that are inside of Paris and other major cities in France. And this is a problem in France. They got the fifth column is behind the walls of these Western countries. They've opened up the doors through this open borders EU type thing in Europe. And there's a fifth column behind the walls. What you're seeing over there in Europe right now is that you have the military that's not in uniform, but you have the military of ISIS and Hezbollah and all those other groups, Al-Qaeda, in Europe. And just because they're not wearing a uniform, that's the way it is now. You don't wear uniforms because they represent a certain government that's sitting in one place. That endangers the government. So the way this wars are being fought, these are proxy wars. They have a supplier who gets the supplier gets his hands off of the weapons, and they're out there as jihadists, individual jihadists, or sometimes they are, of course, inside of groups as well, but they're away from the government that's in fact maintaining them and supporting them and financing what they do, so that they can't be targeted. And they're out here fighting proxy wars, and they're infiltrating these countries, going through the front door. And Europe is asleep. European leaders are asleep. And now, given the fact that we had yesterday with Le Pen losing and Emmanuel Macron winning the election, you can see that France is asleep. I think really that vote yesterday said that what was suspected, which was the suicidal mission that France is on, whether they admit they're on that mission or not, I think that we can now say without any fear of being contradicted that may have sealed the deal. That may have sealed the case, because the fact is that vote yesterday they want to say that Macron is a centrist. Now that's keep from saying that he's a socialist. And they'll say that the far right. Now what is the far right? The far right are those that want borders respected. They want legal immigration. They want people coming into the country to join into the cultural reference that is already on the land space, not to bring a culture on there and stand aside in that culture in opposition to the culture that France represents. They want to have immigrants come in and become French persons. And I've had arguments on radio with people who think that that's asking too much. I said on one program that when people come to America, they should come here to be Americans. And this one guy, one of these attorneys, was arguing that they should be able to come here and be Muslims. I said they're Muslims where they are. They can be Muslims here, but they have to be Americans here. They're coming to America to be Americans. And it doesn't mean you can't be a Muslim. But what he was advocating is that they could come here, and it's fine for them to set up Saudi Arabia inside the United States. And what country would allow people to come into their country and change the culture which attracted them to come here in the first place? If they really wanted Saudi Arabia and the United States, they should have stayed in Saudi Arabia. And if they wanted Sharia law, some of them were saying they went back because they didn't have Sharia law. And, they didn't have Sharia law here. Of course you don't have Sharia law. You have this law. The United States Constitution and other essential documents of American democracy, that's what you have here. And so if you don't want the Constitution, you don't have the Constitution over in Saudi Arabia. But to come to America and expect to have Sharia law here, when you left the country where they practice Sharia law, doesn't make any sense. And yet they are opening doors up in Europe, and they're allowing it to take place. And there are a lot of places in Europe right now. And I was in Europe 2 years ago. And I saw this coming. In fact, I was in that airport that was bombed in Brussels. I think I've been in that airport 3 or 4 times. And I was able to go outside the airport, and it's a lot of hotels around that area. And I was able to walk out the airport, go into the hotel, use the internet over there. I mean, there's almost no security. I don't think I saw any security in that airport. And when it was bombed, I was not surprised by it, because I saw some things when I was there that showed that they've let their guard down, and those jihadists are inside of Europe. And they think they're going to sway them to change their mind by just showing that they are open to other cultures. And nothing wrong with being open to other cultures. But you have to understand that when cultures began to be incubated on the same soil through this multiculturalism, and you have all these different strands and all the different beliefs on the same land space, wherever that's been tried, you've had civil war. And there are no exceptions to that rule. And that's why in the past, what made this country great was that there was the idea of America, that people came here, and they came here to learn the language and to join into what made the country great and embrace the documents this country stands for, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. And that's what made this country great. Now that we're going away from that into some other things that are not going to make the country great and have made no other countries in the world great, we are now becoming more fractured as a nation. And that is the trend that you're seeing going on in the Western world in general, and is going on in Europe right now as we speak. In France, I think they put a death nail, N-A-I-L, a death nail in that coffin. You know, you put nails in a coffin. I think they nailed that coffin shut in that election yesterday, because what Le Pen was talking about was beginning to be serious about the sovereignty of France. And what Macron is talking about is going down the same path and doing the same thing. Look in Britain also. Look at Theresa May. Theresa May wants to open up the Brexit vote. Now they tried the same thing in Britain that they tried here. When Donald Trump won, you probably noticed they were saying, we need to hold another election. We just had an election. But because the outcome was not what they determined, they wanted to have another. They were talking about we need to have the election over again, because they knew that if the election were held over again, which you can't do that constitutionally, but they knew then, those voters knowing the outcome, they now come out because they realized by them not coming out, they had this result. And there were people actually pushing for holding another election. And there's Theresa May, who is the Prime Minister of England right now. She's talking about having another election over the Brexit. And they've already tried to open up once before. They were saying that, well, the people voted Brexit. Now the representatives in the parliament are representing the people, supposedly. But the argument was, well, the people voted for that, but the parliament didn't vote for it. So they want to have another vote, and this time have the parliament, which represents the people, supposedly. So the people have said they want to get out of Brexit. What would Parliament have to say about it if the people had a vote on it? And now Theresa May is talking about opening it back up, because you don't just back out of it overnight. It takes a little bit of time. It says about a two-year exit period. So they're now trying to open it back up because in Brexit, it looked like it's going to be a trend. But yesterday, you saw what happened in France. So now Britain, probably more than before, wants to open this thing back up because they want to put skid marks on any movement away from the global direction that we're going into, because this is about this new world order we've been hearing about. You know, where you have a blurring of the lines, national sovereignty lines, where we have one world. That's what we're people of the world. Just like you say, you don't have male and female. You have people of the world. We're people of the world. We're not people of the where you're from, United States. What's your nationality? They want to erase that and go to a global structure. And I think that's very, very, very troublesome. This movement is a global movement going on, and there are certain persons in back of it that are financing this in different parts of the world. And I think Europe, based on Mark Stein's book, I think Europe is already gone because of the demographics in Europe. Every 1 out of 5 children born in certain countries in Europe, the name is Muhammad. And that doesn't include all the other names, Abdul and all those names, Hassan, that are also names that have nothing to do with the cultural reference in Europe. And so the demographics that you have in Europe show that what is happening in Europe right now, demographically speaking, is that they're just being replaced on their own land space. So it's just a matter of time before the population numbers become so overwhelming that Europe won't be Europe anymore. Europe will be the Middle East. And it's very quiet, and the people do not see it, but they took a giant step toward the global direction yesterday by them turning their back on a person that was talking about we need to stop some of the things that are going on and reverse these trends. And they went there because I guess many of them have bought into this Kool-Aid drinking, where you don't want to be seen as racist and you don't want to be seen as xenophobic. You know, you got all these phobes out here. So Islamic phobe, xenophobe, all these phobias they've created. So people are afraid to make a move because they're afraid of these words, and it's just words, where they're being called these names because they are not open. Well, society should be open to immigration to its benefit. Let's say you let people in that can benefit the country when they get here. So immigration is controlled so that they come in not to serve the persons that are coming in here, but you bring people in to serve the nation. You serve the citizens that are here. But they got this thing turned around where you now have people coming in because they have problems elsewhere. So, used to have Ellis Island, right, as a place where you screen people up until 1952, was it? And you screen people because the question is, do you want all the people who want to come here, do you want those persons in here just because they want to come to the United States? And when we had that kind of screening, you call it deep vetting. That's what countries do. And to do it now is you're being anti-immigrant, and you're a xenophobe because you don't want other cultures inside the country. You can have other cultures inside the country, but you must have a culture that unites all the cultures under one umbrella, one cultural umbrella. And when we understood that, this country was great. Now that we don't understand it, this country is becoming a third world nation. And it might have already become a third world nation. And that's the other topic I want to talk about, which was this issue that we have going on right now, where everybody's patting themselves in the back in Washington. All the Republicans are so glad. They're elated over the fact that they passed the health care. They not passed it, they had a proposal passed in the House of Representatives. Now they have a proposal. And it's all gamesmanship. You know, you saw it when Obama was president. They put one bill on his desk after another. To the Republicans, because they got in the House in 2010, they got the Senate in 2014, and they were putting one bill on Obama's desk after the other, knowing that Obama had said he has his pen, veto pen, he had his veto pen, and he had his phone. And he's going to use it in order to turn away all these attempts to repeal and replace Obamacare. But they were putting one bill on his desk after another. Then they said, well, they said didn't have the House at first, so they gave them the House 2010. Then they didn't have the Senate. 2014, they have the Senate. Now they need the presidency. So in 2016, they won the presidency. When that came about, and having all three of the major components needed to pass the legislation, all of a sudden, those same Republicans couldn't agree upon a bill. And Paul Ryan was saying that he would wait until he had all the votes needed before he would bring the bill to the floor. And of course, that was to keep the Republicans from being identified of which ones were for it in an up and down vote and which ones were not. So wait until they have the votes so they could shield ones that would be in trouble in their district if, in fact, they voted a way in which the majority of the voters in that district would not approve of. So actually covering the back of the Republican Party. So they would bring it to a vote. And they said that they had 238 members of the House that are Republicans. So they had 20 votes that they could. They had 21 votes that they could have that would, carry the day, and it would still be able to be passed. And guess what would happen? Because it's all a game they're running, and that is that it passed by one vote. 20 Republicans voted against what they call the American Health Care Act. Now we had the Affordable Care Act, and that's supposed to be repealed and replaced. They're not going to have the American Health Care. They're going to call this the American Health Care Act. Now, what is the difference between those two acts? Well, what's different about the two acts is that the appearance is different. You see, what you have to understand with these politicians is that once they take power into their own hands, they don't even take their hands and then hand it back and put it back in the hands of the American people. That's not going to happen. And so the appearance of the Obamacare plan, all they're doing is changing the appearance of Obamacare. They're not repealing and replacing Obamacare, they're changing the appearance of it. Obamacare is government care. The government running the healthcare business. The government making the decisions about the health care of the American people. If you want to repeal Obamacare, you have to repeal it out of the hands of the government. Because Obamacare was a government takeover of health care. Therefore, before Obamacare, you didn't have the government involved on the federal level in the health care business through that act passed by the Congress, signed by Obama in 2010. I think it was May in 2010. He wasn't even in office more than, at that point, was in office even 6 months. I'm sorry. He took office in 2009. He was in office, he hadn't been in office for 2 years when he signed that bill into law. So the people objected to that, and they voted the Dems out of the majority in the House and put the Republicans in there because they said they have the bill starts all financial bills, all tax bills, since Roberts called it a tax bill, all tax bills start in the House. And so the American people went to the poll 2010, upset about what happened in May of that year, didn't like the idea of the health care being taken over by the Democratic Party, all of whom voted for it, and there were no votes against it. Therefore, they put the Republicans in charge of the House. They said they need the House in order to stop it because all appropriations come out of the House. So even if it's passed, in order for it to be funded, the House must in fact fund it. So the idea was put the Republicans in there so we could stop it, hit it off at the pass. We didn't stop it at the inception point when signing the law, but if in fact we get the Republicans in there, we could have the Republicans stop the funding stream. And then they said they couldn't do it because they didn't just need the House, they needed to also have the Senate. And that wasn't enough. They were more impotent when they had the House and Senate than when they just had the House. When they had the House and Senate, they were more impotent then than they were when they didn't have either one. They were saying we still don't have any power. And now we have President Trump, and there's a lot of disappointment going on here with a lot of people that begin to open their eyes up to the fact that the swamp is a lot deeper than we thought it was. And cleaning the swamp out is not going to be just electing a different person to be be a dweller in the swamp. This thing is this thing does not give in to party. It doesn't give in to personality. In other words, Washington is operating in a similar fashion as it would operate if an outsider, Donald Trump, had not become president of the United States. And that's a problem. Because it means that our voting doesn't impact what Washington does. Because what Americans want really, more than anything else, they want the government to get out of the healthcare business. And if you repeal Obamacare, what really needs to happen is you repeal Obamacare and take it out of the hands of the government. If you repeal Obamacare and replace it with another aspect of Obamacare, which is the government taking care, being involved in healthcare business, then you're not repealing Obamacare. What you're doing is that you are tweaking it so that the appearance of Obamacare has been changed. And I read all these reports about what they change here, and the mandates are different, and you're not penalized, and all these other things. Yeah, but the government is still making the decision. And what is the government doing? And what is the government doing? Being involved in the business of determining what kind of care I should get, which is a decision between me and the medical practitioner, and that's decision making that does not involve government. How does government get between me and the practitioner in the medical field? How does government get involved in that? I brought to the studio the Constitution of the United States, because I think we're missing a boat here in terms of looking at how they're changing it, and people are applauding the fact, well, it's not Obamacare because it's being changed in this way and changed in that way. Let me read something to you here in terms of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. It says the Congress shall have power, and it lists 18 clauses under Article 1, Section 8, and it talks about the power to lay and collect taxes. It's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 2, to borrow money on the credit of the United States. Clause 3, to regulate commerce. 4, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. 5, to coin money. 6, to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the currency of the United States. 7, to establish post offices. 8, to promote the progress of science and useful arts. 9, to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court is set up in Article 3 of the Constitution. Then inferior courts underneath it, federal courts, the district and circuit courts. Okay, those courts are set up by the Congress. That authority is given in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 9. 10, to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, to declare war. We haven't had a declaration of war by the Congress under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, since December the 8th, 1941. Now, I didn't say that we have not been involved in war. We've not had Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 carried out in this country since December the 8th, 1941. And you recall that America was attacked, Pearl Harbor was attacked on December the 7th, and Roosevelt, knowing that after the country had been attacked, he could go before the Congress and get the approval under the Constitution, and he did that the next day, and having been attacked on Sunday, went to Congress the next day on that Monday, and made the case that we should go to war. And on the 8th of December, the Congress declared war within the provisions of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11. And the U.S. did it through the Constitution. We have not had, of all the wars this country has been involved in since 1941, add the years up from 1941 to 2017. From all those years, from 1941 to the present time, we've been involved in all these wars, and not one time have we had a declaration of war under the Constitution of the United States. That's how far off we are. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12 says to raise and support armies. 13, to provide and maintain the Navy. 14, to make rules for government and regulation of the land and naval forces. 15, to provide for calling forth the militia, to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. They had not even thought about having a standing army. The militias, the people, were the army was to be the whole people. 16, to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States. 17, to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles, and this is very important here in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, not exceeding 10 miles as made by a session of particular states, and the acceptance of Congress become the seat of the government. So the government was supposed to have land ceded to it not exceeding 10 square miles. Let me read that again. To exercise exclusion legislation in all cases, whatsoever, over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as made by a session of particular states, and the acceptance of Congress become the seat of the government of the United States. You know, Washington was extracted from 3 different states around the area of the nation's capital. And they carved it out 10 square miles of land and made that the seat of the government. And then it says in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, Congress shall make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying out execution of the foregoing powers. Now, nowhere in here does it say that Congress shall have the right and the power to regulate health care. And in fact, what I should do is read in the amendment process, because I want to make it even more clear. So then in Amendment 10, they made this statement. Now don't forget that the powers that are delegated to the federal government are enumerated powers. Enumerated meaning that they are expressly spelled out in the Constitution. They're enumerated. They're itemized. We are enumerating these powers 1 through 18. Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 1 through 18. We're going to enumerate these powers. Now, to make it even more clear that those powers are therefore, by being enumerated, those powers are therefore limited, because the enumeration says that these are the powers and those are not the powers. You enumerate them, you enumerate powers in order to limit power to the federal government, because if it's not enumerated, those are powers the government does not have. But to make it even more clear, in the amendments that were passed 3 years after ratification, they were ratified, the amendments ratified in 1791, 3 years after the Constitution was ratified. The ratification of the Constitution had 7 articles in it. So 7 articles in the Constitution originally. And then 3 years later, they're going to amend the Constitution. And in the amendment, the 10th Amendment of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, that was the one that's going to spell out even more specifically these enumerated powers, because it says this in Amendment 10. The powers not delegated. Now, delegated and enumerated are the same thing, right? So when we say delegated powers, delegated means that we are going to spell these powers out. We're going to make it so clear what powers the federal government has that we're going to enumerate these powers, we're going to spell these powers out, and we're going to itemize them in the 18 clauses under Article 1, Section 8. To make it even more prohibitive in terms of these powers box the federal government in the 10th Amendment, it makes this statement. It says the powers not delegated to the United States, that means to the federal government. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor powers prohibited by the Constitution to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people inside the states. So that if it's not listed in Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 1 through 18, if it's not enumerated, if it's not delegated, if it's not spelled out, if it's not expressly stated, then those powers, by the fact that they're not enumerated, those powers, therefore, will reside and be retained within the states respectively, or to the people inside the states. Therefore, they're up here talking, and Patton says on the back about health care, And you look in the Constitution, and that is not in the Constitution of the United States. Therefore, it is unconstitutional. Everyone's talking about, well, this is better than what they had, and it doesn't do this and it does other thing. Yes, but the question is, does it? See, I do look at binary issues too, and that is the binary issue here is, does the Healthcare Act deal with this binary choice? And what is the binary choice here? Expanding liberty or withdrawing liberty? Does it increase liberty or does it take liberty away? And people are applauding the government takeover, and they're not looking at the fact that the government is now making decisions on people's health in this country. And if we accept that, then what the next step is then the government making other decisions in people's lives, and before you know it, you're back on that road again. The road that Friedrich Hayek wrote about in 1944, where he talked about the road to serfdom. And then there's another book that came out just recently called Back on the Road to Serfdom. Because we don't see that this is a liberty issue. And we want to look at the perks. But see, government, the thing that I don't think we understand, government doesn't have any resources of its own. It doesn't produce anything. And so it doesn't have any resources of its own. And so therefore, any money the government has to dispense to the people, it must first of all take it from someone else. Before the government can give, it must first of all take. And so this idea that the government is in fact giving things free, it doesn't, there's nothing, I said this once before on a program that I did, there's nothing free on the earth. I used to think the air was free. But I went to the service station, and had to fill my tire up, and I had to pay 75 cents for the air. Air is not even free. Everything has a cost to it. And so this idea of free, you're paying for it with your liberty. That's what's being lost in the mix. And the Republican Party has shown that they're just as dangerous in terms of the liberty in this country as are the Democrats. And this past Wednesday, you saw them join onto it, come out of the shadows and join into the seizing of liberty in this country. Okay, we are finished for this segment. Want you to stay tuned today at 3:30. They're already in the studio, and that'll be Satori's Black History Corner. Comes on at 3:30. They'll be around about 4 o'clock. Want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.